got a 3-day weekend at the moment. One of the things that we can do though, whilst we're kind of waiting like a minute or two for people to jump on, is my favorite little thing of all time, which is my gratitude practice. So I'm just going to share one thing I'm grateful for from the last 24 hours. If anyone wants to, at any moment, they can jump in the chat box and just write one thing that they're grateful for from the last 24 hours. So for me, I am very grateful for, I just had a really nice, warm, hot bath, actually. And after living in Thailand for 4.5 years, you didn't have a bath in Thailand. That's not a thing. And so I'm really grateful that I was able to have a lazy kind of Sunday afternoon for me in the bath. So that's one thing I'm grateful for. If anyone wants to type in the chat anything they're grateful for, that would be nice. If you don't want to, that's totally okay. We will get started in a second. It's nice to see you. Oh yeah, sorry Marianne, because I unmuted you before. So everyone's going to be muted. I guess that's the other thing. I can go through a couple of Zoom things. I think most of us now, thanks to COVID, know how to use Zoom. Before it was like this thing where I used to say, let's do our coaching session on Zoom, and nobody knew what Zoom was. And now I feel like if you don't know what Zoom is, I don't know where you've been. But so that everybody knows, everyone is kind of muted as they come into the room. But if anyone has questions, you are welcome to unmute yourself at any stage, but it's probably easier if you type in your question into the chat room, and we will try and get to it that way. There is a part at the end where we'll also just ask you if you have any questions, because we really want to make sure that we're answering whatever your questions are on emotional eating. But yeah, if there's something that's coming up for you, you can just unmute yourself and ask us. You know, we're quite laid back here. And I can see, hey Steph, that's so nice that it was your son's first birthday. Happy birthday. You're in Amsterdam. So nice. I love that we have people from all over the world. So good. Okay. Maybe what I will do is, are you ready to get started, Kritika?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I am going to share my screen because we do have slides, which for anyone that's been to talks that I do at PC, I never have slides. It's very unusual for me to actually have slides and, you know, be a bit professional in that way. So let's hope that Stanton has given me, I'm sure he did. I have to share my desktop and then go in this way, which I know is a little bit annoying people. Okay. So first of all, I just want to check, can people see slides? If you can give me a thumbs up, or just perfect. Thank you. Kritika, can you see me before I go any further?
Yes, I can see you, Sam.
Because the thing about doing these talks is that obviously Kritika and I, when we do it together, we need to kind of throw to each other, and we did a talk like this recently and we could not see each other, and it was highly problematic because we didn't know when the other person would be talking, and it was very kind of like there were these weird silences and moments. So I just wanted to make sure that my beautiful co-host could see me. So welcome to our talk on healing emotional eating. This is something that Kritika and I have a lot of, I guess, passion about, a lot of research and expertise in this area, because it's something that came up for so many people that we worked with at PC. So very briefly, for those of you that don't know who we are, because some of you we may not have met before, I am a certified life coach and Kritika is a certified health coach. And we both worked at Phuket Cleanse. Now, I worked there as the life coach from 2016 to 2020. In fact, I started November 2015, so you may have seen me back then if you were there. But I also used to escape every single low season. So if you came within that time period and you're thinking, I didn't see you, that's because maybe you came in June, July, August. I was never really there. I used to go off and escape. And the lovely Kritika was the head of wellness at Phuket Cleanse from 2016 to 2018. So we actually met in 2017 because when she started in 2016, I was not there. Anyway, so, and we are the co-founders of a business called Sparked, which is all about healing emotional eating. So this, Kritika, do you want to go through what we're going to go through today?
Yes, so we're going to cover in this talk today, we're going to talk about what emotional eating is. So we'll take you through so that you understand what emotional eating is and what kind of causes it, why people emotionally eat. We're going to take you through 6 barriers to healing emotional eating. So these are the barriers that we've seen come up over and over again in our work as coaches at Cricket Cleanse and in our private practices as a health coach, as a life coach. So we'll take you through these barriers and also hopefully talk about some of the misconceptions that we see come up as well. I'm sure these will be quite interesting. Then we're going to take you through our 7-part framework for healing emotional eating. So Sam and I created this 7-part framework to help our clients heal emotional eating, and this is really addressing each of these barriers that we will discuss. And we're going to leave you with one of our favorite tools. So obviously we have a lot of stuff that we talk about on emotional eating, but this is one of our favorite tools. So we'll talk about that in detail. And we're here to answer any questions. So if you have any questions on emotional eating, or while we're talking, if there's anything that comes up for you, make sure you pop that into our chat box so that we can address them as we go. And at the end also, we'll open it up for a little bit of discussion and some questions.
Awesome. Okay, so to begin with, what is emotional eating? Well, I'm not going to read it out word for word because everybody can read, but basically, emotional eating is one of the oldest and most popular coping mechanisms in the book. So it is a way of attempting to, a really great way that we heard it described is it's attempting to suppress negative emotions and heighten positive emotions. So essentially, if you are emotional eating, it means that you are experiencing an uncomfortable emotion or a difficult emotion or a negative emotion, and you don't want to be feeling that way. And so you start to eat because eating makes you feel another way. And it could make you feel all sorts of things, from comforted to, a sense of pleasure or excited, who knows. But basically, we know that eating makes you feel good. And so that's what emotional eating is. It is eating to feel good because you're currently not feeling good. So to understand why people emotionally eat, there are actually like a whole number of different things going on. So we want to just go through these points in brief to give you an understanding of what psychologically might be happening that's leading you to emotionally eat. So the first thing that we want you to be aware of is something called the pleasure principle. And this is very basic psychology, and every single person, all of your brains, whether you like it or not, are hardwired in this way. Now, the pleasure principle states that human beings are always going to avoid pain and seek pleasure, right? It is inbuilt into your brain, whether you like it or not. And so this is where emotional eating comes in, because as I said before, it's like suppressing negative emotions. So it's avoiding pain and seeking pleasure, right? So one thing that is leading you to do this is just the hard wiring in your brain, which says, pain, I don't want to feel that. What I do want to feel is pleasure. What do I know is going to give me pleasure? Food, and it might not be happening on a conscious level. You're not thinking that in the moment, but food gives me pleasure, and that's why you're seeking it out. So first of all, it's just neurological hardwiring that's going on. The second point, using food as a reward mechanism. Now, this is something, if you've never really thought about this, so many of us develop this habit of using food to reward ourselves because this was something that was used in our childhood, right? For many, many people, parents use food as a way of often bribing their children or trying to control certain behaviors or reward them for certain things. And it's not that this, again, it's not about blaming parents. It's that we weren't taught how to process negative emotions. And so very often, we use things like food to say, you're doing a good job. And if you're a good girl, we're going to give you this food, right? And so for me, I can remember I didn't like going to swimming lessons, and my reward was if I would go to swimming lessons, Mum would take me to breakfast at McDonald's after swimming lessons. So that's an example of this, but it's also inbuilt into our systems. So I'm not an expert on every country, but I certainly know that in a lot of Western countries and in Australia, if you go to the doctor as a little kid, and I don't know if they still do this, but you have a needle vaccination, then you're given like a lollipop to be like, well done. You did a good job. You got through something bad. And so this is something that over and over again, as kids, we are being rewarded with food to make us feel better. So very often the reason why a person is emotionally eating is that they have developed this habit of, when they experience something difficult, or when they, do like finish a project at work or whatever it might be, they reward themselves with food. This other one, quick fix of emotions. So again, this is what is going on for most people when they're emotionally eating, is that they are experiencing a negative emotion, whether it's stress, loneliness, sadness, boredom. Like, there's so many emotions that could be going on. And what they attempt to do by eating is to fix that emotion, to change it into one of pleasure or one of comfort, right? And so again, this is something that happens for a lot of us in childhood. We are soothed with food. And actually, when we think about why food is one of the oldest coping mechanisms in the book, is that even from the moment you are born, from the moment you come out of the womb, very often, when newborn babies are upset, and of course they're often upset because they're hungry, but we learn when we're born, babies are soothed literally through their mother's breast milk. And so food really is this comforting thing that soothes us. And so we learn that if we are experiencing a negative emotion, we can fix it, quote unquote, because we'll talk about that later, through food. So that's another reason.
I'd like to add, sorry, Sam, I want to jump on here and just add that I want to talk about this term, which is the symbolic substitute. And symbolic substitute is another really interesting psychological term, which talks about the fact that we humans, when we can't get what we really want, we look for the closest alternative. And for a lot of that, when we are, for example, craving company or connection, and I think a lot of people will relate to that for the last couple of months. We've all been isolated away from people and, craving connection. And so the closest thing to that is, for a lot of people, is food, especially people that, if you are wired to use food to make yourself feel better, that substitute, that symbolic substitute for love or for connection or for, all of those things is food. So just,
No, it's a good point. Thank you. Yeah. Self-sabotage, right? This is something that I used to hear all of the time. And I used to say it about myself with clients that were emotional eating, is that they would say, I eat like so cleanly, and then all of a sudden I find myself emotionally eating again. And it's so annoying. I feel like I'm self-sabotaging all the time because I know I shouldn't do it. And yet I'm doing it anyway. Like, I really know that in the moment it's not a good thing, and I still do it. So clearly I have an issue with self-sabotage. And so we use this term to talk about, obviously, doing something where we know better, but we do it anyway. And I think the reason why this term is problematic is that when we just focus on, I'm sabotaging myself, again, what that does is first of all, it makes us the bad one that is out of control, and it's our fault and we've done something wrong, which actually makes us feel guilty and ashamed and all sorts of negative emotions, which then makes us want to emotionally eat more. So first of all, it's a label and a way of punishing ourselves that leads to more emotional eating. But second of all, if you just talk about like this is an issue of self-sabotage, then you never actually look at the problem and like what's actually going on. It's a really easy way of just saying, I know what the problem is. My problem is I don't have enough willpower and I sabotage myself. And we're going to talk more about that later on in the talk. We'll talk about willpower and why it's not about willpower. And so instead of saying to yourself that you are sabotaging yourself, what I think is really important to understand is that human beings, we do not sabotage ourselves, right? It's just actually not a thing that we are hardwired to do. And so the concept of secondary gain is that there is always a benefit or an advantage to the current way that you are behaving. And so when we look at secondary gain in terms of emotional eating, it's really important to understand what benefit you are getting from emotional eating, because there's a benefit that you're getting, otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. And for some people, that benefit might be quite, I don't want to say surface level, but it might be as simple as, I feel really comforted when I eat. Therefore, the benefit or the secondary gain is this feeling of comfort. For other people, it could be so much deeper, right? And so an example of this from my own life was when I was struggling with my weight and I had a whole lot of self-love issues going on, which again, we'll get to later in the talk. But one of the things when I was my weight would fluctuate a lot. When I used to lose weight, I would get a lot of attention from the opposite sex. And for whatever reason, there was a whole lot of stuff going in my life that I did not want attention from men at that point in my life. And so my secondary gain was that emotional eating actually became a way of keeping me safe and building up a physical layer of protection. And so secondary gain is something where there could be all sorts of layers going on, but it's really important to understand what is the benefit or the advantage that you are getting from emotional eating, so that then we can address, okay, this is what it's doing for me. It is meeting this emotional need. So in my case, safety, but in another case, as I said, it could be meeting the need for comfort. And then we can look at alternative, better ways of getting that need met, right? But if we talk about self-sabotage, then we never even acknowledge that we have an emotional need that's not being met. So we really need to kind of get a bit deeper than we often do when we look at emotional eating. And then the last point, Kritika, do you want to talk about this? Is that I guess we often mislabel things as emotional eating when there's something physiological going on, right?
Yeah, and this is about understanding our bodies, establishing a mind-body connection, which is really, really, really important to actually addressing any kind of eating behavior, is understanding what may be going on with our physiology, with our body, that could potentially be impacting my eating behaviors. And this is, we talk about this in a little bit more detail in just a bit. And this is about first acknowledging that there may be physiological reasons that are impacting the way I eat, and understanding those can really help us sort of heal emotional eating, and also understand that, you know, when the difference between emotional eating and when we may be doing it because there is an underlying physiological component to it.
Yeah, awesome. So we're now going to talk about what are the barriers. And again, these barriers came from us being fortunate enough to see hundreds of people through the doors of Phuket Cleanse in our time there, and talking to them about their issues with eating and emotional eating. And we found that there were some really common things that kept coming up that would interfere with a person's ability to be able to kind of to work with this issue. And so we're going to go through the 6 barriers that we've found to be the most common. And we're also going to talk about some kind of misconceptions that a lot of people have when it comes to these barriers. So the first one is for you, lovely Kritika: dieting and deprivation.
This is a big one because this can often feel like quite counterintuitive. So I am going to say this right at the start, that I understand if stuff comes up for you and questions come up for you when I go through this point, and also why this is so important to address right at the offset, because without addressing this point, we can't ever really heal our relationship to food, because so much of our disordered eating and our issues around food is due to chronic restriction and dieting. So this is about understanding and really taking in that the only way to feel in control around food is by letting go of control around food. So just to give, I mean, we've done a bit of research here, and, you know, just one of the points that I often talk about here is, you know, there is no diet in the history of the world that has worked for more than 2 to 4% of the people for longer than 2 to 4 years. So this is about understanding that diets don't work in the long term. What diets do is they set us up for failure. Diets do not understand our physiology. So when we restrict ourselves and deprive ourselves over years, that creates disordered eating. So for a lot of us, the feeling out of control around food stems from years of restriction and dieting. So Sam, do you want to add anything here?
Yeah, no, I would just say that very often the reason why we're emotional eating and we're craving these foods is because they're foods that we shouldn't be eating, which actually makes us want them more. So again, there's studies on what happens when we try to suppress a thought. We actually think about that thing more. Yeah. So when we diet and deprive ourselves of of bad trigger foods, whatever that may be. For me, it was chocolate, but you know, there's all sorts of foods that you might be restricting. Then it is your natural instinct to want that more. And so that's how this dieting and deprivation just completely exacerbates the problem of emotional eating.
Yes.
Yeah. And then the misconception around dieting. Yeah. You want to do this one?
Yeah, one of the biggest misconceptions and one of the biggest things that we hear when we talk about getting rid of the diet mentality is, you know, diet culture is insidious. You know, it's even hard to spot. You know, it's part of our daily lingo. It's something that we kind of, it's so ingrained in us that, you know, when the thought of sort of removing dieting from our life triggers this, you know, most people make this instant cognitive leap that when we talk about sort of removing dieting and getting, you know, rejecting the diet mentality, is that when we reject the diet mentality and we get rid of these rules, we're just going to eat pasta and pizza or whatever your trigger foods are all day long. And that is so far from the truth. And that is what the diet culture makes us believe, that we need these set of rules to be able to eat healthily, to be able to follow, you know, to be healthy, we need a set of rules. And this is what we challenge at this point, that we don't, because like to Sam's point, when we remove the restriction and the suppression of these foods, they lose their power over us pretty quickly. So one of the big points comes up is that I will never be able to lose weight if I stop dieting. And this is what we want, you know, the important thing to remember here is that the whole reason, again, this is around feeling out of control around food and needing food rules, is because we have been dieting. We need those food rules for that. And the whole,
yeah, it's so funny when I think about this one, like, because I'm going to hold my hand up as someone that really had this issue, right? Well,
yeah,
it's not very well and good for you to tell me not to diet, but I actually want to lose weight. So how am I going to do that? Like, if I want to lose weight, then obviously I have to cut out the foods that are making me gain weight. And so I don't really get this point. This was, you know, what kept me in that cycle. And I can just say for anyone there in complete disbelief that it was the moment that I absolutely gave up all dieting and that I allowed myself to eat chocolate every single day of my life that I finally lost weight and have been able to sustain it, and it's never come back.
But to add to that is that you don't also feel out of control around chocolate the same way that you did before.
I can have it whenever I want. And it means, ironically, that I don't want it every day because I can have it. So it really is counterintuitive, but I promise you, if weight loss is important to you, then the best thing you can ever do to lose weight is to stop all dieting and all rules around food.
And this is important because in order to heal our relationship to food and in order to start feeling in control around food so that we can consciously make healthy decisions and eat healthy food and eat food that nourishes us, when we heal, when we remove this dieting and this restriction, that is what helps us to feel in control around food. And that is what helps us eat healthy foods and make healthy food choices.
Yeah.
Which eventually, if weight loss, you know, is something that's important to you, which eventually will lead you to your goal just through a way where you will feel a lot more, you know, your relationship to food will be a lot better in the process.
Yeah. And the next one, again, this is this idea of the mind-body disconnect. Kritika, do you want to talk about this as well?
And this is connected to the point where we talked about the physiological reasons. This is about understanding that our bodies are complex. You know, this is not just, you know, this is about realizing that we can't just control our eating behaviors through our mind. You know, we have a body that has things going on. So this is about understanding that there are physiological reasons that impact our eating behaviors. Some of these that I know we talk a lot about at Pick at Cleanse, for example, is hormones. You know, hormones are a big part of, you know, a big reason that impact our eating behaviors. Another one is blood sugar dysregulation. You know, we know that anyone that's attended Craig's talk knows how important blood sugar is. And, you know, when our blood sugar is dysregulated, for example, that impacts our eating behavior. So this is about understanding, for example, that cravings, you know, something that we talk a lot about as well, is, you know, are pieces of information that sort of tell us that there's something going on in our body. So if you are someone that craves a lot of, for example, fast processing carbohydrates like sugar and bread and pasta, it may have a lot to do with energy. Often there are certain foods that give us instant boosts of energy, like sugar. So if you have sugar cravings, it may not just be because you don't have willpower and you can't control yourself around food. There may actually be a lot more that's going on, which is, for example, an energy imbalance. It may be because we're not sleeping well. So this is about understanding that when I crave certain foods or when I feel out of control around foods, this is not just emotional. There may be physical reasons why this is happening, and addressing those reasons. And I guess one of the
do you want to do this?
Big misconceptions that comes up around this point is that, if I just had a little bit more willpower, I would be able to control my eating behaviors. And again, this is the diet culture. This is what the diet culture tells us, that if you just had a little bit more willpower, you'd be able to stick to that diet longer than you did. Or next time, if I'm just able to practice a little bit more willpower and control, I'll be able to stick to that diet. And I have to say that this is so not true, because the whole idea of willpower to begin with is rooted in control and discipline, which is, again, the diet mentality. When we try to control food and we try to use discipline to not eat bad foods or to control our eating behaviors, that creates this inner rebellion, and we crave those foods even more, or we want those foods even more. We may even feel addicted to those foods because we are denying ourselves. And this is, physical restriction and even mental restrictions. If you're walking around saying, I can't eat this and I can't eat that, and constantly trying to use the power of your mind to control your eating behaviors, that's going to make you want to eat those foods even more. So that's one point. And the second point around willpower is that we can't hack our physiology with willpower. We can't use willpower to control our hormones, which may be impacting our eating behaviors. We can't use willpower to control our blood sugar that may be impacting our eating behaviors. So if there is an underlying physiological reason for you craving certain foods, or there are nutritional deficiencies, or there is a lack of sleep or insomnia and all of these physical reasons going on, and you are craving certain foods for that reason, you're not going to be able to just use your willpower to hack that. We can only improve or heal our relationship to food by addressing these physiological reasons.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, look, it's my favorite. For anyone that knows me at all, you know that I never stop talking about self-love. So I am not going to go on and on and on about it, because there is a huge impact that if you have a lack of self-love, this absolutely can lead to emotional eating. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about, I'll talk about two main things. One is that we know that negative self-talk creates self-created stress in the body, right? And I think stress is a really important thing to think about at the moment, because a big reason why a lot of people are finding themselves emotionally eating more during this time is that we are in unprecedented amounts of stress. So first of all, when you have a lack of self-love, this creates stress in the body. Now, stress, the way that leads to emotional eating, it's three ways, three levels. Physiologically, when you are stressed and that cortisol and adrenaline is running in your system, then you use up all of the source of your energy that you're using up is your glucose stores, which means that they get drained quickly because of that stress response, and therefore you crave sugar. So first of all, on a physiological level, stress leads to emotional eating. On a mental level, we know that when you are in a state of stress, it is the amygdala, the fight or flight part of your brain, that is activated, and the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in processing emotions and rational thinking, is actually not even operating. So mentally, your ability to be able to make certain food choices is just completely impaired. And then on the third level, the emotional level, well, obviously stress is not a nice experience. So again, this is where this is an emotion that we don't like. And so then our pleasure principle kicks in and says, oh, this is pain, I don't want to feel it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to seek out a source of pleasure. So the first way that a lack of self-love leads to emotional eating is because a lack of self-love creates stress in the body. But the other biggest thing to say about self-love is that if you have self-love issues in the form of body image issues, which was certainly my entry point into the world of self-love, then that self-loathing that you have towards your body creates so many different negative emotions, right? So it creates things like disappointment in yourself, embarrassment. Sometimes it could go towards shame. Sometimes, depending on the amount of self-loathing you have, it could be disgust every time you look at yourself in the mirror. And those emotions, then again, now we've got negative emotions that we don't want to deal with, and therefore we want food. And also when we start labeling ourselves as not worthy and ugly and all the awful things that we say about ourselves, then we just think, well, what does it matter anyway? I'm just going to keep eating because at least I feel good when I'm eating, and I hate myself anyway. And it's this awful kind of spiral. So we really need to work on our body image and self-love if we want to heal emotional eating. And the biggest misconception that I see around this is when I talk to women in particular, but I've seen it with men too, and I say, you really need to improve your body image and build some kind of acceptance for yourself right now. And people think, well, if I love and accept myself the way that I am, then I'll never be motivated to change. I'm just going to become really complacent. And actually, it's my self-loathing and the fact that I don't like myself in this body that is motivating me to go out there and to exercise and to eat well and to whatever. And they think that loving themselves is going to stop this. And actually, again, all I can say is this is completely, like, we know anecdotally that for people that try this, when you are loving yourself, it doesn't mean that you're not willing to grow and change and adapt and be different. It's just that you are doing it from a place of love and compassion, and so it's gentle. And we absolutely know that, yes, self-punishment and doing things from a place of self-loathing can motivate you towards change, but it's actually a really painful way to do that. And self-love and encouragement and support actually gets you there faster, and you don't have to deal with all of the feelings of shame and self-criticism along the way. So just because you love and accept your body exactly the way it is now doesn't mean that you're not, allowed to want it to be different and to want to make a change and to want to lose weight. That's all okay, but do it from a place of saying, I want to change, but I'm also completely okay with who I am in this moment. So yeah, it's a big one. Now,
yeah, and I think to that point, just remembering that we human beings can create stress chemistry in our body just by the thoughts we think. So if we're constantly thinking negative thoughts about ourselves or about our bodies, then we are creating a lot of stress in our bodies just by those thoughts. And, that is such a powerful reminder to, really work on our self-love so that we can change that inner dialogue and, hopefully shift out of that negative self-talk, which creates so much stress.
Yeah, I love that. This is the next barrier for you, Kritika.
Yeah, so this is, I guess this is the biggest one. I think, this is like we talked about the definition right at the start, the whole idea of emotional eating, and the definition of emotional eating is, wanting to change our emotional state, whether that's wanting to suppress a negative emotion or heighten a positive one. And I guess our lack of emotional processing skills, and this is often connected to negative emotions more than positive emotions, our lack of emotional processing skills makes us emotionally eat to change our emotional state. So, for most of us, we weren't taught these skills in school. I never had a class, on how to process emotions and how to deal with emotions when I was younger. And, and again, I'm happy that these conversations, we're having these conversations now, but back in the day we didn't. So most of us grew up with kind of learning no skills around how to healthily process negative emotions. And I guess one of the big ones here is actually just the understanding that negative emotions aren't inherently bad and they don't need to be fixed, because this is what we are often told, or when we feel when we don't feel so good, we are often asked, what is wrong? That question itself inherently says that a negative emotion is wrong. And what we really, really, really want to encourage everyone to do is, look at negative emotions in a different light, to look at negative emotions as powerful feedback to look at negative emotions and understand that, negative emotions have a place in our life. They're there for a reason. They often convey really, really important information to us about, what's going on. So that is sort of the first step, because when we start creating that relationship of curiosity and inquisitiveness around our negative emotions, then we can slowly begin the process, which we're going to take you through towards the end of the talk, of actually learning how to process these emotions. So yeah, I guess the biggest misconception around negative emotions is that they are bad and they need to be fixed. When we want to quick fix something, then it is most likely that we're going to use something to change our emotional state. And for people that relate to emotional eating, that's going to be food. So if we believe that if I feel angry or I feel sad or I feel a negative emotion, I need to fix this emotion, what we're going to do is we're going to eat so that that quick fix can, happen, so that we can just eat and shift out of that emotional state. So this is what we do. We feel a negative emotion and we want to numb it. So we eat something so that we just don't have to feel it. And that is what, emotional eating at the core of it is about wanting to change our emotional state by using food to numb ourselves or to just feel better.
Yeah. And I think this is like so important, is this idea, and I use the analogy of like traffic lights to drive this point home, because I think like we want everybody to understand that emotions are like the single most important piece of feedback you'll ever get. It's like an internal GPS. Every single emotion you feel is telling you something about your life. And so when we try and numb negative emotions, that's like the equivalent of, when you have the traffic lights saying, I'm only going to pay attention to the green light because it's positive, and the red light's negative, I don't like it, so I'm just going to ignore it. And you can imagine if you're going to ignore red lights, all sorts of chaos and shit would ensue. And that's what we're doing with our emotional lives. We're going, you know what? Sadness, no. Loneliness, no. Disappointment, no. Anger, no. And we push. And those emotions don't go they go somewhere. They don't just disappear. And so very often they turn into inflammation, disease within the body, or they become these scars and wounds that then come out in the form of gross overreactions. And so we really just want to kind of improve the relationship that you have with your emotions and get you to be like, oh, actually, what if this is just a message coming in telling me something about my life, or about this person that I'm in a conversation with, or about, we really need to become emotional detectives in our own life, which we are going to go into in more detail. But
yeah, and that is to your point, negative emotions don't disappear. They either get stuck in our physical body or they have an impact on our psychological state. So we have to remember that we can't just constantly keep numbing them, because they're going to show up in other ways, and probably in unhealthy ways.
Totally. They might disappear in that moment, but they go
they're gonna stay
until you process them. So it doesn't want to change the slide. Okay. The next barrier is a lack of alternative coping mechanisms. So again, what we want you to understand is that emotional eating isn't the villain, right? Like, there's a reason why we have coping mechanisms, and that is because we are human beings and we go through difficult things and we need to cope. We actually need to know how to self-soothe and how to comfort ourselves. And we really need coping mechanisms because, again, they're helping us get through the world. But it is a lack of alternative coping mechanisms that mean that we go to food all of the time for emotional eaters. And if emotional eating isn't a big thing for you, which it probably is given that you're watching this talk, but for you it could be alcohol, it could be your phone, it could be Netflix, there could be all sorts of things that you're using to numb. But basically, if you don't have alternative coping mechanisms, then very often you're just going to go straight to food every time you feel like you need to soothe and comfort yourself. And so the misconception, I think, that people have around coping mechanisms is that, these coping mechanisms are like really, really ingrained. And so they must be like quite hard to change. And what I want to say on this point is that the reason why food becomes a coping mechanism very often early on in childhood is because when you are a little kid, it's really important to know from a brain development perspective, your ability to feel develops before your ability to think. So the limbic part of your brain develops well before the rational thinking part of your brain. So the first part of your brain to develop is actually the amygdala, which you may have heard of. That's the fear center. This is the part, it's the survival instinct. So it makes sense that this is the very first part of your brain to develop as soon as you come out of the womb. Your amygdala is fully formed, right? So that you know that there's threats to your life. Then your hippocampus starts developing. And again, this is part of the limbic system of your brain that is, again, assessing inputs and seeing if they're a threat. But your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that not only processes emotions, but is also just regulating your nervous system, involved in rational thought, logical thinking, that is not fully developed until you're 25. So what that means is when you are really little, when you feel something, you actually don't have the ability to understand what's going on and to process it. And so we look to adults. Adults become the intermediary that helps us to process that emotion and to cope and to soothe ourselves. And because, as we're saying, none of us got an education in emotional processing, very often adults, you know, they will just say shh, and they might give you some food to calm you down, or they might put you in front of a TV screen, or they might do any number of things to try and help you to cope in that moment, because an adult just does not want to see their child in pain, right? It is a beautiful, loving intention to stop that child's negative emotion. And because they were never taught themselves what to do with the negative emotion, then very often they give the kids something that they know is going to make them feel better. So they might give them their favorite toy or a piece of food, as I said. So this happens when we're really, really young. But then what happens is we forget that once we're past the age of, I mean, even as a teenager, we have way more emotional processing ability. But definitely for all of us here on the call that are adults, we have the ability to process our emotions. We have the ability to develop better coping mechanisms. We do not need to rely on these things from our childhood. And even though we have been using them for a really long time, it's actually quite simple to come up with alternative mechanisms. And we are going to go through that. I'm not just going to say that to you. It's part 4 in a 4-step process that we're going to take you through. But there are ways that we can just come up with better and healthier coping mechanisms, because we need to be able to cope. This isn't about saying you can never use a coping mechanism. Like, that would be self-abuse. So, yeah.
Yeah, and this is, right at the start, this is not about demonizing emotional eating or food or using food as to self-soothe. I think, as human beings, it's an important part of coping is using food to self-soothe, and to some extent we will always do that. But this is about developing alternative coping mechanisms, and about addressing whether, if using food as a coping mechanism is an issue in your life and it's getting in the way of you achieving your goals and feeling good, then this is important to address. And I think
I love that, because for some people, right, emotional eating might not be an issue. It might be something that you do every now and then, and it doesn't have any impact on your life. And if that's you, keep on, go on, and just do it. It's fine.
Yeah.
But if you are someone that wants to heal it because it's becoming a regular occurrence and it's impacting whatever other goals you have for your life, whether they're health goals or it could be anything else, then that's when we need to address it and come up with alternatives.
And I think we believe really strongly that everybody deserves to have a nurturing, nourishing relationship to something that gives us life, which is food. So if food is a source of pain and causes you, it causes you pain, then I think every human being deserves to have, has the right to create a nurturing relationship to food, because we need food to live. We can't not have food in our lives.
Oh, I know. This last point, I'm going to get you to go through, Kritika, but imbalances in primary foods. I'd love you to kind of explain what we mean by the term primary food and what it even means to have an imbalance. Because I think nearly everyone probably has an imbalance in a primary food, but they might not be aware what a primary food is.
Yeah, I think this concept changed my life in many, many, many big ways. This is what brought me to Thailand to begin with. So I'm really passionate about talking about primary foods and explaining, because it's just the language, I guess, you know, it just makes it easy to understand. So this concept of primary and secondary food was actually created by the founder of IIN, which is the institute that I studied health coaching from. And the way that Joshua Rosenthal talks about primary and secondary foods is basically primary foods are areas of our life, like our relationships, our career, our creativity, our finances. So these are all these important areas of our life that feed us, that, you know, nourish us, that nurture us. And that's why they're called primary foods, because these areas of our life have a very, very important role in nurturing and nourishing us. And secondary foods are the food on our plate. So this whole concept of primary food and secondary food is rooted in the idea that nourishment goes way beyond just the food on our plate. So nourishing our bodies, our mind, and our souls isn't just about the food, it's about our life. It's about every single important area of our life. So when we say imbalances in primary foods, is about addressing that there may be things going on in these really, really important areas of our life that are impacting our eating behaviors. So I guess one of the things that we may have a misconception about, or we may not even connect if we don't understand this concept, that, you know, eating behaviors are not connected to our other areas of our life. And this is so powerful, because when we understand that the way we eat, or why we eat the way we eat, is connected to every single other area of my life, then we can start looking at the bigger picture and actually looking at the cause of our emotional eating, rather than just addressing the symptom, which is just trying to fix the food. You know, so this is about looking at where potentially, for example, there may be a void in my life, or, you know, where there may be something going on in one of these areas of the life where it makes, you know, there is a void that I'm using food to fill, for example. You know, this is a really big one. You know, when we are feeling lonely because, you know, we are single and we are really craving a relationship, we may use food to fill that void. When we are working in a job that really doesn't feel good and isn't something that nourishes us and just makes us feel really stressed and bored, then yes, it's definitely, you know, a big thing to then kind of go at 3 p.m. to reach for that snack to make ourselves feel better. So this is about looking at the bigger picture. This is about looking at our entire life and realizing and understanding that what we eat and the foods we eat and the food choices we make, and often the issues related to food, have a lot more to do with other areas of our life than the food itself, or a lack of willpower and control, which is something that we've talked about before as well.
And I think this current era is like it's a perfect example of the fact that the reason why there is heightened emotional eating during this time is that so many areas of people's lives are up in the air right now. People have lost their jobs. There's like all sorts of things that are beyond our control. People are in home environments that might not be particularly nice, and they're stuck indoors, so we don't have that connection to nature. There's all of these areas that are way bigger, that have nothing to do with food, that we're not in control of. And so we're looking for nourishment, we're looking for pleasure, and we don't have the pleasure of social engagements. We don't have all of this other stuff. And so we're just going to food. Right. And so food is it's never the issue. It's always the symptom. And so we really do want people to be like, how can I, and right now it's just about having compassion for yourself, that, you know, it's okay right now if you're emotionally eating a bit more, because life and a whole heap of coping mechanisms and joyful, pleasurable things have been taken away from you right now. So it's, you know, we really have to have some self-compassion for ourselves and understand that the food is just it's just the symptom of whatever else is going on for us. And so we need to really, this whole area of primary foods is really about, as you said, Kritika, like addressing the cause and really getting to, why is it that I feel like not very good at the moment? Maybe I hate my job. So it was those barriers, and I'm going to kind of fly through this framework, because basically the framework that we developed to help heal emotional eating, because I want to get to the crux, which is the tool that we want to leave you with today, was based on those 6 barriers. So we believe that the way that you heal emotional eating, the first part of the framework is really about understanding it. So, going through those things that we went over briefly at the start around self-sabotage, secondary gain, quick fixes, rewards, all of that, getting a really healthy understanding, and then looking at why dieting and deprivation leads to emotional eating, deconstructing and conquering our cravings. So really understanding whether it's emotional, whether there's something physiological going on with our hormones or what might be going on. Then building our self-love and body acceptance so that, again, we're not feeling that shame towards ourselves and that self-loathing, and we're not creating that stress in the body, which then leads us to emotionally eat. Developing better coping mechanisms. So as I said, the tool we're going to give you will help with that. So that you have an alternative. Processing your negative emotions, which is the whole crux of it, is that you really need to process your emotions. Otherwise, you're always going to be turning to food. And if not food, something else. And then creating a nourishing life from the inside out, which is that idea of looking at what are the undernourished areas of your life that you might be trying to fill with food. So that's the framework, and it's based on all of those barriers. You can see how they directly relate. But what we want to do is, even though, as you can see from that framework, it's we believe that it's quite a complex thing. There's a lot of factors playing into emotional eating. We also want to give you something very real that you can use to say, okay, if I use this tool, this is going to help, right? This will help with my emotional eating. I can walk away from today with a very practical thing to start putting into place. So, Kritika, do you want to start? Do you want me to start? Where do we start?
Yeah, I guess the first one is the easy one here, because if we are sort of, the first step here, so this is a process that we talk a lot about around working with our emotions and creating a healthy relationship to our emotions and processing them and sort of, anything do you want to add, Sam, here about this process?
No, I would just say it's a 4-step process. So this is the process that you're going to go through instead of hopefully reaching for whatever your emotional eating is, whether it's a packet of biscuits or a block of chocolate. We challenge you to try and go through this 4-step process first, right?
Yes. So I guess the first step of this process is awareness. And when it comes to emotional eating, this is not easy, but this is, if we have the urge to eat something that, we're not hungry, then I guess that is the point where we have to use that to kind of ask ourselves, is there something more going on? Is there an emotion? And, am I feeling something that's making me want to eat this block of chocolate or this pack of biscuits or whatever your trigger foods are? So this is about awareness. It's about becoming aware that there is an emotion that's there, that's underlying this kind of desire to eat this food.
Yeah, because very often we might not even realize we're experiencing an emotion. I think because it's not a language that we're used to talking about, very often we might be mindlessly eating and we have no idea what's going on. We're just like eating. And again, it's that awareness to be like, hang on, why am I eating right now? Yeah.
What am I feeling?
Yeah, so this is, you go, step 2.
Yeah, you go.
Okay, curiosity. So first you have the awareness, I have an emotion, right?
I'm feeling something.
I'm feeling something. Second step is to say, what am I feeling, right? To have curiosity. And again, that might sound like just, what are you, like, that's obvious. But I think we are really bad at labeling and naming our emotions and knowing what it is we're feeling. And so the better we can get at just being super open-minded and curious and being like, hang on a sec, if I am eating right now, what is it that I'm feeling? Because there's a difference between, all of them, between stress, between boredom, frustration, loneliness, sadness, disappointment, overwhelm. It could be any number of things that you're feeling. But once you're aware that you're experiencing emotion, the second step is, what am I feeling? And then, why am I feeling this way? Who or what has triggered this emotion? And very often when we're looking at triggers, a really great question to ask yourself is, who or what does this remind me of? Because when you are being triggered, it's that there's a past experience that is being triggered in the current moment, right? So just getting better at being like, why am I feeling like this right now? And I mean, it might be really simple, right? It depends on the emotion. Like if you're feeling bored, it might be that you're doing a really boring task that you don't want to do. Like it's not always rocket science. But sometimes you might be feeling really, I mean, right now there's a lot of, you could be feeling super angry at what's going on in the world, you know, with the current just absolute COVID, racial injustice. Like there is so much going on that we can be really angry about. So it's just about being like, who or what is triggering this and causing this emotion? So getting better at trying to figure that out.
And I think one of the things that I want to add in here about the labeling piece is something that blew my mind when I was studying about this whole process about emotional regulation, is that just the mere act of labeling an emotion correctly begins the process of processing that emotion. So, and this understanding that when we are not able to, when we don't have the language around our emotions and we're not able to correctly label an emotion, we don't know how to get out of it, which is the point that we'll cover next. Is labeling is so important, because if we blanket everything as stress, for example, then we may not know how to deal with it, because it may not actually be stress. It may be anger, for example, that you're feeling right now. It may manifest as anxiety or stress, but it may actually be the emotion itself, may be anger. So it's not as easy always, because we don't often have the emotional language either. But I guess just starting to slowly practice this and starting to label our emotions can really help in processing these emotions. And like I said, the process of processing the emotions begins with correctly labeling the emotion.
Yeah. And I think something really cool, which I will chuck in the chat box for you all. If anyone has, an issue with labeling emotions, I clearly can't do two things at once, then two good resources to be able to label your emotions are something called a feelings wheel. So you can just Google feelings wheel and it will show you an image of all sorts of feelings. So if you don't know what you're feeling, have a look at a feelings wheel and you might be able to pick it out from a lineup. And the other thing is, there is an amazing book called Permission to Feel. And as part of that book, there is an app called the Mood Meter. And again, the Mood Meter, it costs about $1.50, but it's an incredible tool for getting much better at naming your emotions. And again, there's all sorts of emotions in there. I think it's 100 and something, and you basically can log in any moment like what it is that you're feeling, but it has a really great way of walking you through that process. So that's another cool tool for anyone that wants to get better at just knowing what it is that they're feeling. The third part of the process, so once you're aware, you're feeling something, you're curious, you're like, what am I feeling? The third step is to process it. And again, we don't have time in this talk to go through all of the ways that you process emotions. But what we will say is in our Heal Emotional Eating program, we go through 4 tools. Those 4 tools are journaling, movement, mindfulness, and EFT, which is tapping. So for anyone that did my talk on managing stress and anxiety, I took you through a tapping. So they're 4 of the tools, but I guess the one that we can kind of focus on today is journaling is a really, really great way of processing your emotion, writing about it, right? Particularly with anger. The way that I like to process anger, if it is anger towards a person, then I write that person a letter that I never give to them, by the way. This is not about spewing out your anger onto someone in the form of a letter. It's about writing it out so that you get it out of you and onto the page, and you can start making sense of it. And you don't ever, it doesn't ever have to go to the person that you're feeling the anger towards, but it will help you be able to move through that anger and come to a place of more peace and more calm if you are able to express it, right? Processing is basically expressing, like getting whatever is in you out of you. So therapy is another way of processing emotions. Like there's a bunch of ways, but basically start to kind of write about your emotions and figure out and just spew them out of you onto a piece of paper, not onto a person. Or if it's a person, do it with a fake person.
And I think Anger is a big one because anger is an emotion that's often very judged, and we're often from a very young age told that anger isn't right, or we shouldn't be angry. Like there's a lot of judgment around anger, but anger is one of the most powerful emotions. Because if we don't express it, it can be really toxic for us, and B, it is such an important sort of feedback to understand, what our values are, and and we feel angry when our values are being compromised, or something that doesn't sit right with us. So it's such a powerful tool to understand ourselves better. But I think what is often, why anger gets such a bad rep is because people have really unhealthy ways of expressing anger, and that becomes the whole reason why people are told not to feel anger, because people are used to being, people are used to abuse and violence, or just, anger, when you express it in unhealthy ways, it doesn't feel good, and it hurts people and all of that. But journaling, for example, is a really powerful tool, because you can express that anger and process that anger without actually ever, hurting anyone, or kind of projecting that onto other people. So anger is a big one, and I think anger is a big one right now because a lot of us are feeling it, whether we're aware or we're not aware of it, with everything going on in the world, and just the injustice and the unfairness of everything going on in the world. I think a lot of us are feeling anger. So if you are, then please use this tool to write it out and get it out of your system, because we don't want it to just stay in there.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's funny, like I always used to think, oh my gosh, if anyone found my journal, they would be appalled, because my journal really is my tool for processing emotion, not only anger, but any negative emotion. So if you read my journal, it's a completely unbalanced view of my life, because it's not about anything good. It's just about stuff that I don't like. And I think very often, hopefully at PC too, people think of me as like a positive, optimistic, hopeful person, which I am. But the reason is because when I'm feeling angry, like again, if you read my journal, there's a lot of explicit, really foul language in there, because I'm aware that it's okay to feel this emotion, and I'm going to get it out of me. And therefore I can show up in my life as this person that is processing my emotions, right? So I think it's so important to give yourself full permission to write anything in a journal. Like no one's ever going to read it,
Yeah.
Shifting it. This is the part of the process that is really the alternative coping mechanism. So before, when we were talking about a lack of alternative coping mechanisms, shifting it is how you develop a new one. So what we mean by this is once you have figured out, and this is why, again, Kritika, you were so right, the labeling piece is important. Once you know what emotion it is that you are feeling right now that is making you want to eat, ask yourself, what is the opposite feeling, right? So again, if I'm feeling stressed, then the opposite feeling would be calm and relaxed, right? And so the shift it part is about you coming up, and anyone that's been to our Life After PC talk will have heard us do this for stress. It's coming up with what is every single thing you can possibly think of that makes you feel calm and relaxed, right? So you need to come up with your own personal toolkit. Now, I highly recommend that you do this. You start writing lists of these types of things, not when you're in the negative emotion. Like this is something that you need to do when you're like now, when you're feeling good, right? So stress is one example. Boredom, as I said, a huge one, right? So if you are feeling bored, again, it's not going to help you to do something that makes you feel calm and relaxed, because that isn't shifting your state to where you want it to be. So boredom, I would say the opposite is feeling excited, stimulated, interested. And so what I would ask you to do is write down those words and write a list. What is everything you can think of that makes you feel excited, stimulated, interested right now? It might be learning something. It might be, and again, this is where it's a bit tricky, because I think a lot of the things that excite us and stimulate us and interest us aren't on the table right now. Travel for me was a huge one, or planning a trip. I can plan it for whenever it is that the world opens back up. But this is where it's so important to know what you're feeling, because the shift it is about shifting into the opposite state of being. It's about knowing that you have the ability to generate the opposite emotion, and you can do it, but you need to know what it is that you're feeling in the first place. And so what I love about this 4-step process is very often where people go wrong is that they are doing 1 or 2 or 3 of these things, but not all 4. So often, particularly in the coaching world, people will get to the stage where they're like, okay, I'm aware, I'm feeling sad. What can I do to make me feel happy? And they go straight to shifting it. But they never think about the processing step, or they never come back to the processing step, you know? And so that it doesn't go away if you don't deal with the sadness. Or the opposite, right? So they're like, okay, I'm aware, I'm feeling sad, I'm going to write about it. But then that ignores the pleasure principle, right? It ignores the fact that your brain is going to want pleasure, right? Writing in a journal, it's not necessarily pleasurable. It's going to help you process the emotion, but it's not going to make you feel good. So we have to do all 4 parts of this process. And I usually see people doing a little bit, or maybe they get aware and curious and they're like, oh, I'm feeling like this. And then they still just eat the food. But at least they've got the awareness there, right? So it's about getting better at going, okay, I'm experiencing emotion. What is it? What is it here to tell me? Why is it showing up? What is triggering it? Processing it, so writing about it, and then shifting and doing one of the things on your pre-made lists. So, you know, for some of us, like, you might only need 1 list because maybe you only eat when you're stressed. So all you need is a calm and relax list. Or if you are like me, I was an emotional eater who ate when I was sad, when I was lonely, when I was frustrated, when I was overwhelmed, when I was stressed, when I was bored, you name it, I ate it. So I needed every single list of possible things I could imagine for all of the opposite emotions to those emotions.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Kritika, I went on a rant.
No, I think, and I think, you know, right, going back right to the start, this whole process, this 4-step process, and all of this will work when we first take and really kind of work, you know, sit with this idea that negative emotions aren't bad and they don't need to be fixed. Because until we're stuck in that mindset, this whole process isn't going to be possible, because, you know, we are just intuitively, we're just going to want to numb it. So until we really sit with, what is my relationship to my negative emotions? Am I someone that has spent years suppressing them and not allowing myself to feel them? Or am I scared of my negative emotions? Am I, you know, that itself may need a bit of journaling and work through to get to this point where we can actually sit with the fact that, okay, I'm someone that allows myself to feel a whole range of emotions and not just the positive ones. And I don't, you know, I am not going to numb myself or suppress my emotions, because I know that that isn't serving me. And if I am an emotional eater, then it's definitely one of the main causes why I'm emotionally eating.
And I love, on that point, very quickly, I'm mindful of people's time, so we'll get to questions, is that, you know, you may have heard that quote, and I think it's a beautiful one, which is, what we resist persists. And this idea that actually, this might seem like you think, oh, this is a lot of hard work and I can't be bothered, like I'd rather just eat food. But the more you resist your negative emotions, they will just persist. But actually, when we start processing emotions, and when we just get better at doing this, and when this just becomes like our kind of go-to, we go, okay, why am I feeling this? And we kind of journal a bit, like, the emotion can pass through us very quickly. Like, these negative emotions actually will go through you and change into a different state of being much faster if you just allow them to be there, accept them, don't shame them, don't judge them. You're just like, hey, anger, welcome to the table. Thank you for showing up.
What are you here to tell me?
Exactly. Does anyone have any questions on anything that we have shared? You can put them, I can now see the chat box. Somehow I've actually managed to be able to do that. So
or you can unmute yourself and ask.
You can unmute yourself. We are here to answer any questions that you have. We are going to very briefly go through, just tell you about a program that we have for anyone that really does struggle with emotional eating and that wants more support. But otherwise, you know, we really would recommend using that 4-step process. So please, you know, unmute yourself, write any questions. I'm going to keep going very briefly just to tell you about this program, but you can keep, I have the chat open, right? So I can see your questions if you haven't. Although as soon as I try and change,
I can see them, Sam.
I can see them still. Okay, so this is the course that Kritika and I have created. It's called exactly the same as this talk, Heal Emotional Eating. As hopefully you can tell through this talk, we are so passionate about this, and that's because I wasted way too many years of my life with this problem. It's something I struggled with for 22 years, and how ridiculous, you know, the amount of time and energy that I wasted thinking about what I was putting in my mouth is just time and energy that I could have been putting into doing great things in the world and changing my life. So I don't want anyone to waste a single second on emotional eating if they don't have to, right? So this is why we want to help people.
And I really want people to have a nurturing, nourishing relationship to food, because I know how amazing it feels and how liberating and freeing when, you know, like to your point, Sam, when you don't have, you know, spend years and hours and days of your life thinking about food. You know, of course, you know, eating healthy and nutrition guidelines and all of that are really important. I'm a health coach. I've probably spoken to a lot of you in person about this, but our relationship to food often overpowers our knowledge when it comes to eating and when it comes to making food choices. So this is as important as gathering information around food and learning what to eat and learning about nutrition, because without this piece, we often aren't able to follow through with stuff that we learn.
So true. So for PC peeps, we are doing a deal where if you sign up in June, by the way, this program is completely online. It is 8 modules. The 8 modules, the first 7 are that 7-step framework. So you would have seen that it basically is going through every barrier that we've talked about today. They are video lessons, but they're short videos. So between 5 and 15 minutes is the max. So in fact, some of them are even 3 minutes. We try and keep them quite short, bite-sized lessons. It's all online. You can do it at any time. You have lifetime access. So yeah, and there's worksheets to take you through all of this stuff. And there's journaling prompts, there's the feelings wheel, there's every kind of thing, every tool that we can possibly think of, all of my self-love tools that for anyone that's done that talk, everything is in there. So that's what the program is. And if you buy in June, we're going to give it to you lovely PC peeps for $149. It's $199. So you're saving $50. And if you buy in June, this is our gift to you. We are going to give you 4 group coaching calls with Kritika and I. So we are literally going to answer any question that you personally have. We're going to coach you through whatever your particular issue is, because for you, it might be that dieting and deprivation is causing your emotional eating. For another person, it might be more their lack of self-love. For another person, it might be their inability to even know what they're feeling and to process that. It could be a combination of all of them. But basically, we want to be there to support people and give them like actual personalized coaching. So we are only offering that because those coaching calls are going to take place in July. This is why it's only being offered to people that buy the course in June. It's not because, you know, it's just if you want to be on those calls, then they are happening in July. So we need to have you in our program in June. But you get to do the course whenever you like. So it's not that you need to start it now, but if you want the coaching, then we highly recommend joining. And the way that you get that $50 off and these 4 coaching calls is to enter PC gift as
I've
the
put
code.
that in the chat box as well, the link and the code.
This is, thank you, Gavin. This is the website. So sparkcommunity.com/heal emotional eating. So that is where you go, even just to read more about it. So yeah. you might not choose to do the program, but if you want to actually see like what it is that we're talking about, then go to that website, have a look, and as I say, use the code PC gift. And then you'll access that $50 discount and the 4 group coaching calls. So that, I think, is that our last? Oh, thank you. I'm going to stop the share and just put the thing in the chat, the website.
Yeah, I've done that.
And you're all, you're asking it as I'm thinking it. So I'm just writing the website up. sparkcommunity.com/heal emotional eating. Oh, why did that hyperlink?
I've just put it to. Oh, sorry, I didn't put. Sorry. Let me.
I don't know why that didn't hyperlink, peeps. Maybe Kritika can fit. Oh, look, there she goes.
Sorry,
Kritika
I had a private chat on, so I've done it to the whole group now. But,
oh, perfect. Um,
And I think one of the main reasons I'd like to add we created this course is because Sam and I wanted to continue sort of working together in any way we can. For those of you who don't know, we're in 2 different countries, and I don't know when we're going to be in the same country again. Obviously, Sam is in Australia. I'm in Dubai at the moment. I'm flying to India soon. So, and the second thing is we wanted to just kind of put together everything that we've learned. And I think this course is sort of everything that we have worked at PC and everything that we have learned through our own journeys and through working with clients around this issue. You know, we just wanted everything to be in one place because there is so much that goes into this. And I think, you know, if we were to choose one topic that can help the most amount of people that we work with, this is kind of it.
Yeah, because that's the thing, like when we start, the reason, by the way, that this course came about was we realized it was this like issue that so many people had. So we went out to everyone, and some of you may have been the people that we emailed, but we said, can you give us your number one question about emotional eating? And our thought was that we would come up with this like 1 hour talk.
Masterclass.
Right? We were like, we'll create a masterclass to answer all your questions. And then the questions came in, and we were like, oh my goodness, there are so many questions. And we realized that it's more than it really is. It's more than a masterclass. It's an entire, because there, as we kind of briefly touched on today, there's so many little factors. And yeah, and when you start looking this stuff up online, sure, you can go and find this information like we have, but it took us a long time to find all of the various studies and research and everything. And so we just want you to have it in one place. You know, with little videos that they fit into your day, you know, 5 to 10 minutes. Thanks, Susie. Thank you everyone for being here. If anyone wants to, like, I'm going to stay for another few minutes just to chat.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to just say
hi. The recording. I guess anybody that watches it, I hope you enjoy the talk. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us and through our website. And I guess a lot of you